The silence in our small bathroom was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. It was a crushing, suffocating thing, pressing in on my eardrums and making my heart pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. In my trembling hand, I held a small piece of white plastic, a digital window that had just declared a monumental shift in my universe. One word in stark blue letters had changed everything. Pregnant. For a fleeting second, a dizzying, brilliant wave of joy had washed over me. My breath had caught in my throat, a giddy laugh bubbling up. Me. A mother. A family. My mind had instantly filled with images of tiny fingers wrapped around mine, of bedtime stories and scraped knees, of a love so immense it would redefine everything I thought I knew. I had pictured telling my husband, Mark. I saw his face breaking into that wide, easy grin I fell in love with, saw him lifting me up and spinning me around in the middle of our living room just like in the movies. We had talked about this, dreamed about this. This was supposed to be our happily ever after starting. But the man standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, was not the man from my dreams. His face was pale, his jaw tight. The easy grin was replaced by a thin, hard line. His eyes, usually so warm and full of light, were dark and distant, looking at the pregnancy test in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. Mark. I whispered, my voice barely audible. The joyful bubble inside me was rapidly deflating, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the test. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly rasp I didn't recognize. It was the voice of a stranger. You messed up. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't shouted. They were spoken with a chilling, quiet finality that was somehow worse. You messed up. Not, we have a problem. Not, this is unexpected. Not, how did this happen? As if this was some colossal unilateral mistake I had made entirely on my own. As if he had played no part in the creation of the tiny life that had just announced its existence. What? I stammered, shaking my head in disbelief, a desperate plea for him to take it back, to say he didn't mean it. Mark, what are you saying? This is wonderful. He finally lifted his gaze to meet mine, and what I saw there shattered my heart into a million pieces. There was no joy, no surprise, no love. There was only raw, undiluted panic. And beneath it something colder, accusation. Wonderful. Are you kidding me, Sarah? He scoffed, pushing himself off the doorframe and starting to pace the small hallway. We can't afford this. I'm up for a promotion at work, my career is just taking off. We were supposed to travel next year, remember? Italy. We were supposed to be saving for a house, not for this. He gestured vaguely at my stomach, a look of disgust on his face. You should have been more careful. You messed up. There it was again. That phrase. You messed up. Each syllable was a hammer blow against the fragile new life and the hope I had held just moments before. The walls of the bathroom seemed to be closing in, the air growing thin. I sank down onto the edge of the bathtub, the cold porcelain a shock against my skin. The plastic test felt heavy like a stone in my hand. Mark. It takes two people, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and rising anger. How can you say I messed up? We wanted this. We talked about having a family. Talked about it, yeah. Someday, he shot back, his voice rising. In the future. When we were ready. When we were financially secure. Not now. My God, Sarah, do you have any idea what this does to our plans? To my plans. My plans. The words hung in the air between us, stark and selfish. In that moment, the man I had married, the partner I had promised to build a life with, vanished. In his place was a terrified stranger who saw our baby not as a blessing, but as a burden. A threat to his personal ambitions. An anchor that would drag him down. The days that followed were a blur of hollow misery. Mark's initial panic calcified into a wall of icy indifference. He stopped touching me. The casual kisses in the morning, the arm he'd sling around my shoulders while we watched TV, the way he'd pull me close in the middle of the night. It all stopped. We were roommates living in a silent, suffocating truce. He would leave for work before I woke up and come home late, burying himself in his laptop, avoiding my eyes. The home that had once been my sanctuary, a place filled with laughter and warmth, became a cold, sterile environment thick with unspoken resentment. My joy was a secret I had to keep locked away. The morning sickness started, a constant roiling nausea that left me weak and drained. I would retch quietly into the toilet, my hand pressed over my mouth to muffle the sound, tears streaming down my face. Not just tears from the physical misery but tears of profound loneliness. I was going through the very first, very real trial of pregnancy, and I was doing it completely alone, just a few feet away from a man who refused to even acknowledge what was happening. I tried to talk to him again a week later. I found him in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator as if the answers to his problems were hiding behind the milk carton. "Mark, we have to talk about this," I said softly, my hand instinctively going to my still flat stomach. "We need to make a plan. We need to see a doctor." He sighed heavily, shutting the refrigerator door with a thud. "There's nothing to talk about. You made a choice." "It wasn't a choice, it was us living our lives, being married." My voice cracked. "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to get rid of it?" The question hung between us, ugly and horrifying. I hadn't even allowed myself to form the thought, but his reaction had driven me to this dark place. I watched his face, praying he would be shocked, that he would pull me into his arms and apologize for his behavior. He just shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I'm just saying it's your body. It's your mistake to deal with." His cowardice was more painful than any anger could have been. He wouldn't say the word. He wouldn't tell me what he wanted. He was abdicating all responsibility, placing the entire weight of this life-altering decision squarely on my shoulders. If I kept the baby, it was my fault for ruining his life. If I didn't, the guilt and the grief would be mine alone to bear. He had engineered a situation where he could remain blameless, a victim of my mistake. That was the night I understood. I wasn't just dealing with a man who was scared. I was dealing with a man who was cruel. The love I had for him, the future I had envisioned, it all started to curdle, turning into something sour and painful. The loneliness intensified, becoming a physical ache in my chest. I wanted to call my mom to hear her excited voice, to let her share in the news. I wanted to tell my best friend to go shopping for tiny baby clothes and speculate about names. But how could I? How could I share my happy news when it was the source of so much misery in my own home? How could I explain that my husband, the man everyone thought was so charming and devoted, looked at me with contempt every time he walked into a room? So I kept my secret. My body was changing, a miracle taking place inside me, but on the outside I was shrinking. I lost weight from the stress and the morning sickness. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. Mark's emotional abandonment was absolute. He began making comments about money constantly. "Had to use the credit card for groceries, they're so expensive," he'd say, giving me a pointed look. "That electricity bill is insane, we need to cut back." It was a clear, calculated campaign to make me feel the financial burden of the baby before it was even born, to make me feel guilty for its very existence. He was trying to punish me, to make me regret the life I was carrying. But with every passing day, with every wave of nausea, with every flutter of anxiety, a tiny, fierce spark of defiance began to grow within me. This baby, my baby, was not a mistake. And I would not let him make me believe that it was. That spark of defiance became my lifeline. It was a tiny flicker in a vast ocean of despair, but it was warm and it was mine. It was the only thing Mark couldn't touch. His campaign of psychological warfare continued. A slow, methodical erosion of my confidence and joy. The man I loved had become my tormentor, and our home, a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment we had decorated together with such hope, felt like a prison. Every morning I woke with a stone in my stomach that had nothing to do with morning sickness. It was the dread of another day of sharing space with a man who wished I, and the life inside me, would simply vanish. My first doctor's appointment was at 8 weeks. I'd circled the date on the calendar in our kitchen, a silent act of rebellion. Mark saw it. He glanced at the red circle, then at me, and said nothing, his silence a deliberate and painful statement. He was making it clear. This is your journey. You're on your own. Walking into the OBGYN's office was like stepping into a different dimension. The waiting room was filled with round bellies, beaming husbands fetching magazines for their wives, and the soft murmur of couples talking about names and nursery colors. I sat in a corner, clutching my purse to my stomach, feeling like an imposter. Every smile exchanged between a couple felt like a personal sting. When the nurse called my name, her eyes did a quick practiced sweep behind me, looking for the other half of the equation. Just you today? She asked, her voice kind, but the question felt like an accusation. Yes, my husband had a last-minute work emergency. I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a flimsy, pathetic excuse and we both knew it. I spent the entire consultation answering questions in the singular. My medical history. My lifestyle. When Dr. Evans asked about my support system at home, I gave vague, cheerful answers that felt like a betrayal to the tiny being I was trying to protect. But then came the moment that changed everything. She dimmed the lights and prepped the ultrasound machine. Alright Sarah, let's take a look. This is always the exciting part. I held my breath as she moved the cold wand over my abdomen. The screen was just a swirl of gray and black static at first. I couldn't make sense of it. I felt a surge of panic. What if there was nothing there? What if this whole nightmare was for nothing? And then Dr. Evans stopped. There, she whispered, tapping a finger on the screen. You see that little flicker? I squinted, my eyes filling with tears, blurring the image. And then I saw it. A tiny rhythmic pulse of light in the middle of a small bean-shaped blob. It was a flutter. A heartbeat. A fierce, impossibly fast, impossibly real heartbeat. That's your baby's heart, she said, smiling. Strong and steady. 160 beats per minute. Perfect. She flipped a switch and the room was suddenly filled with a sound like a tiny, galloping horse. Whoosh 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 whoosh. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of life. It was the sound of my child. In that instant, the abstract concept of pregnancy, the problem that Mark had created, became a person. My person. A sob escaped my lips, a raw, ragged sound that was equal parts joy and soul-crushing sorrow. This was the moment I was supposed to share. I was supposed to be squeezing Mark's hand so hard my knuckles turned white, and we were supposed to be looking at each other with tears in our eyes, our world tilting on its axis together. Instead, I was alone in a dark room with a kind stranger, my hand clutching my own arm, trying to anchor myself to reality. The joy was so immense it was physically painful because there was no one to share it with. Dr. Evans printed a small black and white photo for me. It was grainy and indistinct to anyone else, but to me, it was the most precious object in the world. I tucked it safely into my purse and walked out of the clinic in a daze. The lie I told myself, that Mark was just scared and would eventually come around, crumbled to dust. The man who could willingly miss hearing his child's heartbeat for the first time was not a man who was merely scared. He was a man who didn't care. That night, armed with the ultrasound photo, I decided to make one last stand. For my baby. I couldn't let us live like this. He was on the couch, laptop open, scrolling through work emails, a deep furrow in his brow. He had built a fortress of work and silence around himself, and I was about to try and breach it. I sat on the coffee table in front of him, forcing him to look at me. My hands were shaking as I pulled the photo from my purse and held it out. I went to the doctor today, I said, my voice quiet but steady. This is our baby, Mark. I heard the heartbeat. He glanced at the photo with a look of profound disinterest, his eyes barely registering the image before flicking back to his screen. Hey, and how much did that little field trip cost us? The cruelty of it stole my breath. It was so casual, so dismissive. He hadn't asked if the baby was healthy. He hadn't asked if I was okay. He had reduced this miraculous moment to a line item on a budget. It's not about the cost, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. This is your child. Doesn't this mean anything to you? Look at it. I pushed the photo closer to his face. There's a heartbeat. A real, live person is growing inside of me, and you're acting like I bought a ridiculously expensive pair of shoes you didn't approve of. He finally slammed his laptop shut, his eyes flashing with irritation. You want to know what I see, Sarah? I see a problem. I see a dozen problems. I see $30,000 in hospital bills. I see sleepless nights that are going to tank my performance at work. I see the end of our life as we know it. That's not a baby. It's a black and white picture of the anchor that's going to drown us. And you're the one who dropped it in the water. The anchor that's going to drown us. The words echoed the sentiment of his first reaction. You messed up. But this was worse. This was calculated. He had had weeks to process the news, and instead of moving toward acceptance, he had moved deeper into resentment. I can't do this anymore, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I can't live like this. I can't bring a child into a home with a father who despises its very existence. Then maybe you should have thought of that sooner, he said, standing up and towering over me. His voice was low and menacing. You're being hysterical and hormonal. You're not thinking clearly. Gaslighting. He was trying to make me believe my valid emotional response was a symptom of a hysterical pregnant woman. But the sound of that galloping heartbeat was too strong in my memory. It was my truth. No, Mark, I said, standing up to face him, the ultrasound picture still clutched in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I am thinking perfectly clearly. I walked back into our bedroom, the one we had shared, and packed a small overnight bag. My hands were steady now. The tears had stopped. I felt a strange and hollow calm. He didn't follow me. He didn't try to stop me. I could hear him opening his laptop again in the other room, the quiet clicks of the keyboard a final testament to his priorities. As I walked out the front door, leaving my key on the entryway table, I knew I wasn't just leaving him for the night. I was leaving the life we had built. The future I had believed in was gone. I had no idea where I was going. I had no money of my own, no job that could support a child, and a deep, gnawing fear of the future. But as my hand rested on my stomach, I felt that tiny, stubborn flicker of defiance ignite into a steady, protective flame. It wasn't just my life anymore. I had to fight for ours. My first call was to my sister. As I heard her voice say hello, the dam of my composure finally broke, and the whole story, everything I had been holding inside for 2 agonizing months, came pouring out in a torrent of sobs. The phone felt slick with sweat in my hand as I stood on the dark sidewalk outside my apartment building, the place I used to call home. My sister, Chloe, picked up on the second ring. Her voice, usually so bright and bubbly, was instantly laced with concern. Sarah? What's wrong? It's almost midnight. And just like that, the floodgates opened. The carefully constructed dam of composure I had maintained while packing my bag and walking out that door completely shattered. I told her everything. The words tumbled out of me in a chaotic, hiccuping rush. The positive test, Mark's horrifying reaction, you messed up, the weeks of icy silence, the financial threats, the ultrasound, the final soul-crushing conversation. I cried so hard I could barely breathe, my body shaking with the force of months of suppressed fear, hurt, and loneliness. Chloe didn't interrupt. She just listened, a steady, calming presence on the other end of the line. When I finally ran out of words, dissolving into exhausted sobs, she spoke, her voice fierce with a protective anger that was aimed entirely at Mark. Where are you right now? She asked. Outside. On the street. Hey, don't move. I'm 30 minutes away. I'm coming to get you. You're coming home with me. There was no room for argument in her tone. It wasn't an offer. It was a fact. We're going to figure this out, Sarah. We, she said, emphasizing the word that my husband had so cruelly erased from our vocabulary. You are not alone in this anymore. Hanging up, I felt the first true exhale I'd had in 2 months. Leaning against the cold brick wall of the building, I looked up at the window of my apartment. The light was still on. He was in there, probably already absorbed back into his work, having moved on from the minor inconvenience of his wife leaving him. In that moment, I didn't feel love or even sadness. I just felt a profound and empty pity for him. He was going to miss all of it. The first kick. The hiccups. The beautiful, messy, transformative journey of becoming a parent. He had chosen his ambition over his own child, and it was a loss he would never truly comprehend. Living with Chloe was like coming up for air after nearly drowning. Her small, sunny apartment became my haven. She fussed over me, making sure I was eating, nagging me to take my prenatal vitamins and letting me sleep for 12 hours straight. For the first time, I could talk openly about my pregnancy. We celebrated it. She bought me a book of baby names, and we'd spend hours laughing over the ridiculous ones and earmarking the ones we loved. She was the first person to touch my stomach and talk to the baby, her voice full of love and excitement for her future niece or nephew. She was the support system, the partner that Mark refused to be. The legal fallout with Mark was swift and cold. He communicated only through text messages, each one a sterile, formal blow. He cut off my access to our joint bank account, leaving me with nothing. A lawyer's letter arrived at Chloe's apartment a week later, formally beginning the divorce proceedings. There was no remorse, no apology, just a clinical severing of ties. He was erasing me. As my belly began to swell, so did my fear. How was I going to do this? I had no job, no savings, and a baby on the way. But Chloe's unwavering faith in me was a constant source of strength. "One step at a time, Sarah," she'd say. "First we focus on keeping you and this little bean healthy. The rest will fall into place." The turning point came when I was 28 weeks pregnant. It had been a good day. I was starting to feel the baby move regularly, powerful kicks and squirms that I found endlessly reassuring. But that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I felt a sharp, debilitating cramp, followed by another. I went to the bathroom and saw the one thing every pregnant woman dreads: blood. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I screamed for Chloe. The next hour was a terrifying blur of her frantic call to 911, the wail of sirens, and the paramedics loading me onto a stretcher. In the ambulance, I gripped Chloe's hand, my knuckles white, convinced I was losing my baby. After everything I had fought for, after all the pain and the sacrifice, it couldn't end like this. It was too cruel. At the hospital, they rushed me into an examination room. The doctors and nurses were a whirlwind of calm, efficient activity, their faces grim. They hooked me up to monitors, and once again, I heard that familiar galloping whoosh 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 of my baby's heartbeat. It was fast, a frantic rhythm that mirrored my own terror, but it was there. The doctor's diagnosis was stark: preterm labor. It was too early. Far too early. They gave me injections to stop the contractions and a steroid shot to help the baby's lungs develop, just in case. They admitted me for observation, and Chloe stayed by my side, her face pale with worry but her presence a solid anchor in my sea of fear. That night, alone in the sterile, beeping quiet of the hospital room, I hit my rock bottom. The fear was a living thing, a monster with its claws wrapped around my heart. What if my body failed this child? What if, after all my talk of being a protector, I was the one who couldn't keep my baby safe? Tears streamed silently down my temples and into my hair. I laid both my hands on my round belly, feeling the tautness of a contraction. "Please," I whispered into the darkness, my voice breaking. "Please, little one, stay in there. You have to be strong. I know it's scary, but I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. We have a whole life to live, you and me. We're a team. Please just hold on." I don't know how long I lay there, talking to my baby, sending every ounce of strength and love I possessed into my own body. But slowly, miraculously, the hours between the contractions began to lengthen. The cramping subsided. By morning, everything had stopped. The doctor came in, his face etched with surprised relief. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he said, looking at the monitor strips. "You've stabilized. You and this baby are fighters." Lying in that hospital bed, I knew something within me had fundamentally shifted. I had faced the absolute worst-case scenario and had come out the other side. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, unshakable certainty. I could do this. Whatever happened, I could do this. I was a mother. The rest of the pregnancy was a quiet period of rest and growth. I stayed on modified bed rest at Chloe's, and she, along with our parents who were now fully in the loop and incandescent with rage at Mark, rallied around me. My mom cooked meals, my dad assembled the crib Chloe bought, and friends from my old life finally told the truth, sent a flood of love and support. I was cocooned in a world of care that Mark had tried so hard to deny me. 12 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, I went into labor for real. This time there was no fear, only anticipation. Chloe was by my side, a perfect coach, breathing with me through every contraction, holding my hand, telling me I was the strongest person she knew. And after 8 hours of intense, powerful work, I finally got to meet my baby. They placed her on my chest, a warm, squirming, screaming little miracle with a full head of dark hair and the most perfect tiny fingers I had ever seen. A daughter. As I looked at her, my heart cracked open with a love so immense, so all-consuming, it eclipsed every bit of pain and heartbreak that had come before. She was the reason for it all. She was worth every tear, every moment of fear, every sleepless night. "What's her name?" the nurse asked softly. I looked down at my daughter's face, a tear splashing onto her cheek. "Hope," I whispered. "Her name is Hope." The first year of Hope's life was a beautiful, chaotic, exhausting and joyful blur. We created our own little world, Chloe, Hope, and me. I found a remote job doing customer service, which allowed me to be home with her. It wasn't glamorous and money was tight, but our little apartment was filled with laughter and love, things my big, beautifully decorated home with Mark had lacked entirely. Mark did reach out about a month after Hope was born. A mutual friend had shown him a picture. He sent a text, "She's beautiful. I made a mistake. I want to see her." The old me, the Sarah who had craved his approval, would have jumped at the chance. But the woman who had fought for her daughter's life in a lonely hospital room knew better. I texted back, "If you want to be a father, you can speak to my lawyer about child support and supervised visitation. But you and I have nothing to talk about. You didn't make a mistake, Mark. You made a choice. And I made mine." He never replied. He pays his court-ordered support, a silent, electronic transfer once a month, a ghost in our finances. He has never met his daughter. And I have come to realize that Hope didn't lose a father. She dodged a bullet. Today, as I watch my beautiful, funny 2-year-old daughter chase butterflies in the park, her laughter echoing in the sunshine, I know with every fiber of my being that Mark was wrong. I didn't mess up. I was given a gift. The moment I saw that word, pregnant, my life broke into 1,000 pieces. But I painstakingly, with the help of those who truly loved me, put it back together. The life I have now isn't the one I planned, but it's so much better. Real. It's built on a foundation of resilience, strength, and the fierce, unconditional love for a little girl named Hope. The worst thing that ever happened to me wasn't getting pregnant. It was the realization that the man I had promised my life to was incapable of love. And the best thing that ever happened to me was being forced to find out that I was strong enough to provide all the love my daughter would ever need all by myself. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt lost and found your strength in an unexpected way, please share your own journey in the comments below. Your story matters and you are not alone. Don't forget to give this a like if it touched your heart, and subscribe for more stories of hope and resilience.